Surah 43. It is by no means easy to give a satisfactory account of the composition of this surah. Something edited, right? Apparently straightforward, though it, for the most part, is. The difficulty arises from the uncertainty of date and the insertion of two passages, verse 9 through 13 and 67 to 78, which evidently later in being placed where they stand are apparently earlier than their context. Verse 9 through 14 join formally quite well to verse 8, but are quite out of place in the terms of the opponents, as from their position they must be, and they break the connection of verse 8 with 14 and verse 67 to 78. Well, if this is the end, and this is, if you consider these things as starts and ends of this thing in between, all of this stuff makes more sense, right? Verse 67 to 78 are again quite appropriate in the present position to break the connection between 66 and 79. We must assume that in both cases, an earlier passage has been inserted into a later surah. Verses 9 through 13 are fairly evidently the expansion of a Meccan sign passage. Verse 67 to 78 probably have been rise unless we assume them to be wholly Medinan. Verse 79 comes much later, after 67 and after 68. Verse 28 and 29 are apparently an addition made with 25 to 27, which has no connection with the surah, and verse 57 to 59 have evidently been placed. Where's the 79? Have been the obvious question. Now, 57 to 59 has been to obviate the questions as the continued use of the story of Jesus in the Qur'an after Muhammad had rejected the Christian doctrine regarding him. Well, Jesus rejects the Christian doctrine quite conclusively in Matthew 7, 21 to 23. If you take that literally, how can you not do anything good in Jesus's name without him being like, hey, you worked outside my law. I didn't know anybody like you. Come on. It's not about calling him Lord. It's about doing the will of the one who sent him. That too, the verse it starts with, I can quote the whole thing, but this explains the presence of the unconnected in verse 60 to 62. The rest of the surah may possibly be a unity. If so, it must be Medinan, for the reference to Jesus, verse 63 to 66, is most probably so, and the use of the word Nabi, prophet, exemplar prophet, in Semitic languages, it's the awakener of the inner fruit. It's not just transmitting, it's bringing something out, right? An exemplar. Verse 5 is also Medinan, but if so, it must be pretty early, and there is the possibility that the surah may have been pieced together for the Quran from the passages of various states. This is perhaps confirmed by the position of 81 and 82, which would be more in place near the beginning of the surah, perhaps after 17 or 19, verse 83 to 85, seen to be a later addition to 81, 82, probably with the back of 86 to 89, which are unconnected. Okay, verse 28, 29, and with 25 to 27, 69 with 67 to 68, 9 to 13, expansion of the Meccan sign passage. Yeah, I think I shared all that. Surah Az-Zukhruf, chapter of the ornamental work. The book from Allah, Meccan, for the penalty of rejecting a prophet, early Medinan, 5 through 7. Allah acknowledges creator, but his worship shared by others, same time, later insertion based on Meccan material, verse 8 through 14. The wise, as in decisive. The book, the original word of God, which all revelation comes from. So see, and what they say about the Jewish or Christian text or whatever. We believe in the revelation. We believe in the inspiration of what came to those prophets. But what they necessarily write in their own books, for the most part, let's just say we don't know, right? And we definitely know that some of it, like Jesus wouldn't, the scripture of Jesus wouldn't have been in Greek. It wouldn't have been in Latin. So that's all we know, that none of that is original. But some of it could be a direct translation. And the couples of all, the different species. And we have the level stretch. What's the level stretch? So yeah, the earth has been, leveled out enough that it's is useful, right? And a part only. Yeah, some people are only worshiping God a part and worshiping something else another part. And there's absurdity of saying that God has daughters, 15 through 17. The angels, those light beings that are not female, 18 through 29. That would be Meccan. And where's the other notes here? Okay, a common religion, so a common community, a religion, probably the word, not religion, but system of judgment, which religion should be the system of judgment, but it, kind of goes beyond that. And a contest comes not to be seen. Some people, when they have one type of child versus another, aren't going to tell people about it. And Surah 17:42 talks about people having certain ideas regarding the things they're worshiping. But some of these people are like, they don't want daughters, but they're acting like God has daughters. And they're acting like, they're gendering the light beings and saying, well, those female things out there, but the sons, those are the gods, and the goddesses are the, yeah, it doesn't work like that. But also the jinn, that some of them they would say are, well, they're not. So the rejected males, that's why the mythology of the jinn is actually overwhelmingly male, because they're delineating a lot of the female entities that are jinn over to the angel side. Well, it makes it a lot more seductive, oh, it's not your enemy, it's your friend, that female entity. God is not bound to choose an important person as a messenger. 30 to 34 are, well, that's not the right way to put it, but not the person that the people would want. Verse 27 and 25 and 26 is connected in reference to the return. The people who are unbelievers, like 28 and 29, they're, this address is thought to be spoken of God, like God's going to personally say these words. Of course, God's supposed to personally be saying these words because it's supposed to be revelation. Surah 21:45. There's the reference to the two towns, the uncertainness of it. I don't know, the two Jewish colonies outside, Mecca, Medina, being the two big cities of the region. It applies, whatever. And so is God bound to act as they think he should? No, that's the issue with creationism. It's not that you're saying God didn't create the universe or whatever other thing you're thinking, that God has to do things how you personally would speculate. See, that's why you don't speculate at all, because it's, ascribing to God stuff. dividing from the mercy of God. See, that people think that God is bound to choose out of wealth and standing and disposing of wealth and standing among the unbelievers, as well as wealth. Wealth in itself isn't of account. It's what you do with wealth, of course. He would have given it to them in unknown measure if that was really the thing, right? And assurance to the prophet early Medinan. I'm trying to rephrase some of these things as it goes along. 39 to 44. Story of Moses, late Meccan or early Medinan, 45 to 56. So coming to them, as in the judgment, God's calling the jinn and the humans forward. The explaining of the meaning east and west is spoken by the unbeliever to Satan, and what follows by God to them all. And then some of the signs are just, one after the other. And, difficulties to give us lessons, those build up on each other. Some object to the use of the story of Jesus, 57 to 62. But the thing is, it's not what people are worshiping. It's that they're worshiping, other than God. It's not about which one it is. It's about, it's about that they're worshiping something other than God. That's the issue. The rivers which flow, the flowing beneath. Okay, yeah. So the water is not just what you see. There's more resources out there. That's how I think of that. The slight emendation, am I not? So am I better? Am I not better? Some hardly make things clear. Moses' halting speech, which is important with the prophets, that they're not known for their, they gave great speeches and great poems and stuff like this. And they just had a period where they were better at it. That's not an argument that's allowed for the prophets. That's taken away when we have information. And so going to your people, you desire, you incline to guide people, and sometimes they pick up things and follow. So don't worry about how you're received. Do the right thing, share the right thing, share truth, and just don't worry about things. And the condemnation of the polytheists associating him with God. Yeah, Jesus and the rest of them are not going to stand for that sort of thing. So chapter 19 talks more about Jesus than any other chapter, I think. The Qur'an or its message, what's their, the thing that people deviate about. On the assumption that the passage is continuous, the pronoun is taken to refer to Jesus, whose second coming is one of the signs of the hour. Hence, alam, or mark, is sometimes read instead of ilm, knowledge. And the hour, the knowledge about the message, the debating about it, the hour of the day of judgment, a lot of that predicting of the day of judgment, that's not the point. Prepare for the end times to happen in your life, for them not to happen, whatever. You're preparing for your death moment most of all, right? In verse 60 and 61 join, me must refer to God, but it refers more naturally to the prophet. Well, it refers to God. It doesn't refer naturally. Angels of you, so it being addressed the prophet, that makes more sense. The Jews rejected Jesus, early Medinan, 63 to 66. Of course, the rejection was mostly because the whole Christian thing. The sects differing, not the Christian sects, but those who accepted Jesus and those who rejected him. Well, actually, yeah, both of them. Because there's really, because people say, well, if you don't have the Nicene Creed, and if you even rephrase it, you're not really Christian. No, if you somehow think that Jesus is divine, then you're Christian. Of course, there's people who are Nazarene that are not Christian because they don't think that Jesus is divine. That's not about his personality, you could say, but the people who resign themselves, so Muslimin, and making happy gala attire, God swoops in at the end of it all and provides you with things that will make you happy, and the fruits to eat, to ensure, and the name of the chief angel guard of hell, Malak. So there's reference to Malak Taus, not as Shaitan, but as like the guard of hell, sort of, and that's why Gnog Banog. So there's mixing in some other mythologies of that, which if Malak Taus is in another way of saying is worship, it doesn't matter. It's real position. It's the worship is wrong and has gone to certain lengths like human sacrifice or something, but that's not the usual. Let's not. Okay, so there's no escape from Allah, probably followed by verse 66, 79 and 80. God has no offspring, Meccan 81 to 89. And one of the things that we need to remember is that part of the reason why Islam is considered satanic by a lot of people is that the jinn and the humans are both addressed by by some of the passages, if you don't think of the whole thing of the Qur'an that way. And we can also say some other stuff too about that okay, it's the natural religion. God is in charge of hell, and well, the Bible doesn't make Satan in charge of hell either. It's just some side stuff that makes Satan like even down there right now in the first place. So there's a plot of those who twist and plate firmly. They've woven something. So not all Tantra, because a lot of people in their left-hand path have tried to make it into some evil rebellion thing, but Tantra is not inherently against revealed religion or something. It just has a little bit different approach than yoga, and it's usually unrecognizable from the outside, the difference between Tantra and yoga. So people need to knock that off too. They're connecting versus they're weaving. Okay, well, identity and linking, yeah, pretty close to the same. The messengers, of course, the light beings are involved in message of the rain and all sorts of stuff. It doesn't mean that the rain's not a physical processor, but and knowing, referring to the opponents, and something related to verse 8. Okay, the truth being known. And Surah 44. The beginning is confusing to people like Richard Bell, but it can't be construed as it stands in terms of it being an edited thing, but this needs to be due to the introduction of the Quran Surah to stand at the head of a chapter of the book. And this reference to the book in verse 1, however, need not imply that it was being delivered to Muhammad, but it may simply be to revelation in general, and the earlier form of the passage requires some asseveration to begin with. Verse 5 may also, with some hesitation, be assigned to the early form. The following passage seems to have been altered. Verse 15 at a place and follows better upon the first word of verse 9. It does not necessarily imply the last day, though it possibly does. The story of Pharaoh, which has no reference to a general judgment, but enforces rather the destruction of the particular unbelieving people as it stands with an assurance of the deliverance of the believing people. It is probably Meccan. It seems earlier than the version of 26:9. So the reference to the people of Tuba, verse 36 and 37, is appropriate to a special punishment, but it is embedded in eschatological material, and as the story of Pharaoh may have also been used to enforce simply the idea of punishment of the unbelievers. The description of the respective fates of the wicked and the pious, and especially 40 to 42, seems later than the preceding passages, but the surah as a whole, for the alteration at the beginning, was probably Meccan. Surat Ad-Dukhan, the chapter of smoke. So this isn't just reminding of smoke at the end of times. This is something that can actually explicitly tie to it. Surah 47, verse 1, the separated and wise affair. The punishment certainly coming upon the unbelievers. Meccan 8 through 31. And the year of famine, because famine can affect people's vision. The smoke manifest verse. But Joel 2:30 and Acts 2:19 is a confirmation of that sort of message. And if the verses be continuous, we must regard 12 and 13 as an aside, and 14 and then spoken directly to the unbelievers by Allah. And then we have Exodus 8:26. As, the stoning. So reference to this idea of stoning people that don't agree with you or have, something spiritual to share that isn't quite getting along, right? Asking the people to do what they should do and all that. Oh, you're not a prophet, we can kill you. It's like, that's not how it works. Because if somebody's not a prophet, the idea that killing them proves it is absolutely ridiculous. 33 to 42, objection to the resurrection in reply, Meccan. These say, the unbelievers say, the punishment of the wicked, the hot water, the Himarites, South Arabia. Oh, no, there's the order to the angels. I thought that was a 3. The 2, the people of Tuba, the Himarites of South Arabia. Okay. So the punishment of the wicked, 43 to 50. The reward of the pious, 51 to 59. And so the Apocalypse, the book of Revelations, 2:11, the death except the first blaze, available in thy tongue, the Qur'an, like the passage that says the Arabic Qur'an. Well, of course, every recited revelation is in whatever language the prophet had that received it. Nobility, if you have this false sense of nobility about you, then the light beings come in and say, hey, nope, we know better. So Surah 45, the surah is Richard Bell is rather confused about the surah, and it's difficult to assign the various portions to their proper context, not to speak of their dates. Well, if you're trying to rearrange things and not accept the order in which it's been learned, yeah, you're usually going to actually end up with problems with most stuff. I don't find this way of thinking of a lot of things, but various portions of proper context, not to speak of their dates, but that it does consist in various strands is fairly evident. The basis of it as a discourse on the signs, which appears in 2 to 4, 11, 12, verse 10, and 19 seem to have followed. 2 sections of the discourse, verse 10, has been dispatched by 5 to 7, possibly in the Quran period, 23 years of Quran period, but which still later, verse 8 and 9, seem to have been as a hit to the Jews who made fun of Muhammad's revelations. And of course, it's broader than just addressing the Jews or the Christians. If you're whether at the same time 19 was displaced by 13, 14 is difficult to say, but in spite of a tradition which places these verses later, they would seem to belong to an early Medinan period. See, they're going against the historical references to when these passages were learned to make this commentary. When Muhammad is counseling a conciliatory attitude on part of his followers while proclaiming that God will punish the unbelievers, verse 20 and 21 seem to be best taken with them. The break has probably been caused by 15 to 18 having been written on the back of 10 to 14. The passage would then continue with 8 and 9, they belong to the period when Muhammad was adopting an independent attitude over against the former recipients of revelation. The context of verse 22 is doubtful, but the comparison with other passages in which similar language is used indicates that it is directed against the Jews. 23 to 25, on the other hand, seem to have the misassociators that aren't people of the book in mind, because pagan and heathen, infidel, and stuff like this, it doesn't fit as defining people just in terms of, well, they're of a different religion. No, that's the judgment scene which follows may have been originally Meccan, but 27 is clearly Medinan, and the similar rhyme phrase indicates it was for 28, and 33, 34 may also have been at the same time. The conclusion, 35 and 36, probably belonged at the same time as the original judgment scene. Surat al-Jathiyah, the chapter of the kneeling, kneel in righteousness before you're forced to kneel because you were wicked, right? And so we open with some sign verses. We talk about the persistence of unbelief in 5 through 7, but let's go back here, and we have kneeling can also mean gathered together. Well, certain context, right? Holy Medinan, 5 through 7. Ridicule of Revelation, 8 and 9. 10 connects to verse 4. You have more signs in 11 and 12. God will avenge, 13, 14. And then we have the children of Israel, former mediators of revelation. Muhammad now independent. So that would be 15 through 18. I'll guess 19 connects more to 12. 21 and 22 connect more to 13, 14. Okay. So going back here, we have the rain. Rain is a provision. The revealed revelation is, the affair. And the affair being the knowledge as well. And, okay, then we have, God's victories. The verse 13 is numbered here. I'm not sure if the numbering is the actual numbering because of the games that Richard Bell is playing here, but it's said to refer to the expedition of Bani Mustaliq, but of (14) verse 5. The sentence seems similar to that of Romans 12:19. And so we have, what's the thing? Let them pardon those who don't hope for the days. Okay, so the Sharia has a sense of the watering place, an opening leading to water. Some say the middle path law, the meaning of law. It goes beyond some simple meaning of law. But then again, it doesn't, right? The way. So similar to Sunnah in the context. But no, a living of the law, the living law, nothing wrong with that. But so Muhammad being given independent access. Persistent unbelief, early Medinan, verse 22, and has one, hast thou, knowledge, some knowledge of revealed religion in reference to the people being referred to. So there's some truth that's supposed to bring them out and over to the good cause, right? Or towards the right. Time is the thing that destroys. The Arabs had a sense of fate, but God, a dahr is one way to refer to God as like God over time. Sort of like the people who built Stonehenge, that one altar stone was actually upright, so it was like a 19th stone or something. They were honoring divine time, really. Like the time is a divine quality, as a name of God. That's, and the workers of vanity, we have, people make things vain. Perhaps they're doing worthless things that aren't really one way or the other, but sometimes they just, the revelation delivered to them, we have 3969. This is our book. And the book of the record of men's deeds, of course, then every community is getting its book, but every community has its scripture that it was expected to accept. So the judgment scene, Lake Meccan, 26 to 36. And so what's this other one? Making amends, much like 3067. It's like, while you're still alive, make reconciliation with what the message of God is. Don't think you can just make amends of it when it's all said and done. And there's a time period. You can wait for that. Surah 46. That this surah is not all of the peace is acknowledged. Verse 14 through 17 are of a different character than the rest, and there's a break at 20. Further, 6 and 7 connect better with 2 than with their present context, except in Arabic maybe. Verse 3 to 5 seem later and have a anti-Christian bearing. Well, just because they don't accept the polytheism of Christianity, it's not entirely about being anti-Christian or anti-Jew. The humility of Muhammad's claims in verse 8 is evidence of a fairly early date. Well, that was the whole thing throughout, really. I don't, until he learned the whole Quran, he didn't know, if there was more to learn, even though he went over it. It's like, well, I know there's more to learn. I just don't remember more than I know. Verse 9 through 11 seems to have early Medinan of a passage claiming the support of a previous revelation, while in 12:13, Muhammad is still holding out monotheism as the one essential for acceptance with God. Verse 14 through 17 are certainly later, as if the tradition asserts they refer to the son of Abu Bakr. They may date from some time after the Battle of Badr, for he was still an unbeliever at that time, but they are formulated quite generally. Verse 18 would connect with verse 13, and 19 may go with it, although the connection is a little doubtful, and the story of the punishment of Ad comes in rather unconnectedly and differs from other versions given. It would end quite well at 24, and 25 seems later. 26 and 27 are puzzling. Verse 26 would give another ending to the story if we left it off there, perhaps other than 25. Well, a reference or response to the story, reference to response to the story, reference to response to the story. You can do that. Verse 27 seems later. Nothing, however, being said about them with certainty. The reference to the jinn listening to the Quran, verse 28 to 31, verse 32 to 35. Well, isn't it 29 to 32? Isn't that what makes sense there? So the numbers, I think, are changed here. Verse 32 to 35 may possibly have some connection with the beginning of the surah, but in their present position, they also stand isolated. They belong to the period when the length of time which bodies have been in the grave was an objection to the resurrection, which Muhammad felt necessary to counter by the statement that it would seem a very short time. Verse 35. Surat al-Ahqaf, chapter of the sand dunes. After the opening, we have the futility of any deities but Allah. Medinan, verse 2 is perhaps earlier than the other part of 2 through 5. The rejection of the message, verse 6 and 7. Muhammad, an ordinary messenger, same time earlier, verse 8. Muhammad's doctrine similar to that given to the children of Israel, late Meccan, early Meccan revised. Sincere monotheism, the one essential, late Meccan, early Medinan, 12 and 13. Kindness to parents, Medinan, 14 to 17. Men's fates determined by their deeds, joins 13, perhaps 2 unconnected verses, 18 and 19. Story of Ad, Meccan, verse 25 and 27, probably later. So that would be 20 to 27. The jinn listen to the Quran and believe, Medinan, verse 28. Perhaps Meccan, so that 28 to 31. The truth of the resurrection, verse 32, early Medinan. Oh, but we're going to 35 here. And so from the comment, Tradition asserts the incident of, the jinn and the incident of Taif, but the first verse may belong to that date, but the phraseology of the following verse is certainly Medinan. Yeah, that's not how it works. Is there's a phrase. It's like patrons or intercessors. They act like there's side deities, neighbors, that reference there. There's a difficulty. There's no towns in the neighborhood of Medina, and by the time of the Jewish colonies near Medina had been destroyed, there was no need for such threats there. The verse seems to be an early conclusion of the story of Ad, and the phrase, perhaps a general reference to the towns formerly destroyed for unbeliefs. The towns round about you. It's like, well, just because things were like 20 miles off or something doesn't mean there weren't places that they knew about. And honestly, that can refer to the places that they know about in Arabia, right? The threatened punishment is referenced in what's promised. The prophet Hud, the brother of Ad, and Luke 16:25. People misusing their worldly enjoyment. The Qur'an, Surah 41:24, relates this to the people that become losers. And the tradition about Abdurrahman, son of Abu Bakr, him saying that these people, what was being related of religion was some just repeated thing that's been passed around for a long time, old world tales, So Surah 27, this surah for the most part earlier than the Battle of Badr, but has been with later. It was begun in early Medina days when Muhammad still prepared. Well, no. The earliest portion is the eschatological passage of 1 through 3, followed by 13, 15, 16, 17. These two latter verses were, however, left in the form of rough notes, his mind being meanwhile struck by another idea, these that a temporal overthrow of the unbelieving city Mecca brought about with the assistance of his own followers. This had been hinted at, but found rather a mixed reception among his followers. In the originally private passage 18 to 21a, there's no A, B, C, whatever, and the Quran wasn't like some secret thing at first. Things were said, and there were rumors amongst people who disbelieved what was meant by certain passages and stuff like this. So the idea that it was like some secret, I'll tell you the passage before other people learn it and keep it to yourself, and none of that, right? He notes this, but confirms his resolution to obey what he regards as divine guidance, in spite of the sin which, according to Arabs' views, it was involved. It wasn't a sin to God what Muhammad did. It was the sin according to the Arab custom. Okay. A definite command to fight the unbelievers was then issued with the promise of divine assistance, because there was killing and not just oppression, but killing against them, 4, 5, 8 through 12 in the original form, which placed the eschatological continuation of 1 to 3. The effect of this is reflected in the originally private passage of verses 22, 23, 25, 26. Some defections have, however, taken place, that these are dealt with in 24, 29, 30, same time after battle, probably before Uhud, when the prophet was faced with a similar difficulty of persuading his followers to prosecute the war with Mecca energetically. The surah was repeated with some changes. A phrase was introduced in verse 2, if this had not been done earlier. An addition was made to verse 4 and 5, recognizing and taking the ransom of prisoners. In verse 6 and 7, added a new rhyme phrase added in 9. The end of verse 21 was altered. Verse 24 was substituted for 25, 26, 28 for 29, 30. The surah was continued by a hint that the trials in front of the community were intended to sift out and reveal doubtful followers. 31 to 34, an appeal to his faithful followers to be steadfast and contribute to warlike preparations. And Surat Muhammad, chapter of Muhammad. The prospects of believers and unbelievers, early Medinan, 1-3, war with Meccans ordered, 4-12, reward of the pious, connecting more with 1-3, 13, and 21, connecting to 14 there, and 13 connecting to 15, notes for descriptions of paradise and pains of hell, 16, 17, God's help promised, 8-12, strengthening of the prophet's resolution against Mecca, 18-21, effect of distinct command to fight the Meccans after delivery of 4 and 5, 8-12, 24, 25 and 26. Okay, 22-26, renegades, doubtful believers, same time as preceding, 28, as 29 and 40. 29 and 30. Doubtful supporters, same time as 28, 31-34. Muslimin, not to flag at prospect of further fighting, same time as preceding, 35-40. And so the disease of those who distrusted God's policy and split off as an opposed, and the angels take away at death. You know, the light beings. The fire rings can certainly take you away from the truth and life, but well, some of them will. God is born with them. That does make sense to refer the pronoun to God. You know, who and who are masculine, but they're not something that you can't refer to female with, or something without the gender too. So, or yeah. So yeah, don't follow along with those who cause the bloodshed in the community. And the surah, okay, this verse has 2 mentions of surah, which is interesting. Oh, that's not the real number, is it? 22 isn't the real number for that one, is it? So there's a distinction between the Quran and other utterances of Muhammad. Well, no, that's what I've been saying all along. And it was known before Muhammad said, this is Quran and this goes between this and that sort of thing, what the Quran was. And if you listen in Arabic, it's a lot easier to catch those references, right? If somebody says a dua that's not from the Quran, you know, then you notice it. Even if it contains Quranic phrases, you still notice it, right? And there's a reference to the Meccans expecting the hour to come all of a sudden if it's going to come, but that's not how it works. Surah 22:53, people following their desires. Where's the number? I don't notice the little number. Oh, the people saying something to something after knowledge has been given. Okay. And there are details to this that are parallel between stuff you find in Christian and Jewish literature. Horowitz das Kornitsch Paradis and Green Muhammad 2, page 161. It refers especially to Ephraim, Cyrus, hymn 10. And then we get Surah 48. This surah is mostly concerned with the expedition to Hudaybiyah, which has been ended in disappointment by the Muslimin. The Prophet seems to have been concerned at the refusal of the Meccans to accept in the written treaty his adopted title of Rasulullah. This has been sent back to the previous passages, assuring him of being Allah's messenger. Verse 1-10 contain earlier elements, dating probably from about the time of Badr. Verse 11-12 deal with the Bedouin who have been expected to join Hudaybiyah expedition, but did not. This goes with verse 14, which has probably been added somewhat later. Verse 15 also deals with them and forbids their taking part in the expedition to Khaybar, which they wish to join in seeing spoil and prospect. Verse 16 is later when Muhammad is at least thinking about the expedition to the north, which culminated in at Muta, and it was not in Muta, but culminated at Muta. This was repeated when the expedition was actually in preparation, with the substitution of verse 17 for the later part of it. With verse 18 and 19, we return to the time shortly after Hudaybiyah, when the prophet is meditating how the disappointment may be made good. When verse 19 was added, the expedition of Khaybar had dawned upon him. Verse 20a announces the promise of spoils, and 21 to 23, 25, 26 evidently belong to the situation after Hudaybiyah. But the second clause of verse 20 seems to imply the promise has been already fulfilled, and verse 24 reads as if an entry to Mecca had already taken place. It is tempting to suppose the passage delivered after Hudaybiyah has been referenced after the expedition of Khaybar and its safe performance of the pilgrimage provided for in the truce. If, however, we take 20b, it means simply that Allah has decreed the speedy fulfillment of the promise. It is possible to take the whole passage 20 to 29 as addressed to the Prophet's followers shortly after the truce of Hudaybiyah. Verse 24 would then be referring to the fighting in Mecca, which would have taken place after the victory of the Muslimin if the truce had not been made. And this chapter is important to a lot of Sufi ritual, you could say, and it includes the oath. And it's important to governmental practice too, because the verse 10 and 18 are used to connect to saying oaths. Third, Al-Fath, chapter of the clearing up, an assurance to the Prophet after Badr, extending to Hudaybiyah 1 through 7. A further assurance originally connected with verse 1, providing 10 after Hudaybiyah, 8 through 12, 13, 14, the Bedouin not to join the expedition to Khaybar, verse 15, the Bedouin reserved for a more difficult enterprise later before the northern expedition, verse 16 through 17, the Muslimin to be recompensed for their disappointment originally soon after Hudaybiyah, verse 19, maybe later, verse 18 and 19, spoils promised soon and the disappointment belittled and explained shortly after Hudaybiyah, verse 20 to 28, character of the believers, verse 29, continuation of the previous page. And so the example from the Torah alluded to in that verse that has all the letters and marks of the Arabic language, you could say. Well, it doesn't have the abbreviated, the separated letter indications, but you know the other stuff. Deuteronomy 6, 8, and 11, 18. Mark 4, 26 and 30 relates to the parable that we're talking about there. God has spoken the truth literally to his messenger in a vision. And, you know, the vision that has been shown to have been right. Because they're like, well, this doesn't seem the case, but no, been shown the vision of victory, and the victory did happen. If the unknown unbelievers were still in Mecca who might have suffered or gone through hardship is probably the better term, because suffered has an implication, right? The expedition carried out through warlike conclusion have been removed from the town. Yeah. So that's why you can't just start things. You have to fight those who are fighting you. The allegiance under the tree at Hudaybiyah, the tree was chopped down to prevent people from worshiping the tree later on. I mean, after Muhammad died, of course. The conquest, the clearing up, the hastening, you know, what's decreed to be soon. People wanted it to ask for it to be hastened. Hey, so it's like, if you're the truth, no. The victory which the Muslimin would have won if a battle took place is referred to, but then a greater victory is to come. Surah 9 at 84 is like unto, okay, where's the note? Turn away. Oh, so said God before, and yeah. So people given a chance to believe and all that stuff, and they've just chosen not to beforehand. Surah 4:1 is related to God becoming knowing, wise, forgiving the sins, like Surah 47:21, the clearing up, like 32:28. And one more chapter in what we're going to read here, Surah 49. That this surah dates from the last years of Muhammad's life is evident from the tone of assured authority with which he speaks in dealing with the conduct of his followers and demands from them the etiquette, consideration, and respect. The failures in this matter also with which he has to find fault are those of the rude Bedouin, and the later part of the surah deals specifically with them, so that we are carried into a time when Islam had spread far beyond Medina, and the Arab tribes were giving in their submission more from self-interest than from sincere conviction of the truth of Islam. The later date is attested to by the fact that few, if any, revisions can be tested in the surah. We cannot, of course, assume that it is all written at one time. The passages, in fact, are more or less separate and were probably added as an occasion required, but it would be possible to argue that the first 12 verses were connected with an incident, such as referred to in verse 6, that, however, may not be the case. We may assume that no very long interval separated the various passages from each other, and the surah as a whole belongs about the year 9 or 10. Surah al-Hujurat, chapter of the chambers, Muslims not to be forward, the first verse, to speak respectfully in the Prophet's presence, verse 2 through 5, and you don't act with forwardness by proposing stuff. Should not shout to him from the outside. Okay, yeah, verse 4 and 5. Be careful about receiving evil reports, 6 through 8, to maintain peace among themselves, verse 9 and 10, not to satirize each other, verse 11, to avoid suspicion and backbiting, verse 12. The houses of the Prophet's wives, which the people were denied free access to, Surah 33:53. The requirement of the religion of Allah, the fair of Allah. Piety, the test of nobility, verse 13. The Bedouin have accepted Islam but aren't believers, 14 and 15. Of course, actually, the real deal is you don't come up with titles to distinguish yourself among the other people as some sort of sectarian thing. You can say there's a station of Muslim movement, ihsan, that sort of thing. But, when we say Sunni or Shia and all that other stuff, how can we do this, right? When the religion wasn't to divide ourselves into sects, especially by using proper conclusions. If you're a Shia, Sunnat Allah is something you're supposed to be following by definition. You're supposed to be Ahl Hadith. You're supposed to be Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, according to the Shia narrations. But it's not a sect, right? So, well, these are Muslims, but we are believers, Muslim, anyways, the protest snubs, verse 16, retort to the Bedouin arrogance, 17 and 18, and okay, let's see, the works at all, their obedience would nonetheless count in the favor at the judgment. And when he is dead, why nibble at his absence when he's absent? Yeah. If you aren't going to make the accusation in people's face, just leave it alone, more or less. But then again, sometimes there's fear because you have an aggressor and a pressure. And I've seen posts online about somebody saying, "Why did you lie about me raping you?" Like as in, I think the implication was that they were keeping it secret. It's like, what, you want people to know that you're a rapist? I mean, if somebody's trying to atone and get over being that sort of thing, maybe that, but a lot of people making messing with people's reputation. Why not just encourage the good and truth, give credit where credit's due, et cetera, et cetera.